Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Sorry for the long hiatus, as I said, I had to take a break and help take care of my dad for a few weeks. Thanks for giving me a chance with your continued support. I hope we can continue to grow as a community together. Massive thanks to the authors, Roxi2Star and ThatOneZed for allowing me to adapt their awesome story. Follow the link in the description to check out more of their works. Today we will be listening to the 6th part of What If Deku Had Both One for All and All for One. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 12, The Roaring Sports Festival. Chapter by Roxi2Star. The 2 weeks went by faster than Izuku could anticipate. He spent all his free time training, mostly with Yagi. Laps around the school, weightlifting at the gym, martial arts classes, and quirk training were all he knew for that time. It was a given that Izuku, under no circumstances, would be using All for One during the festival. This was not a life or death scenario. Aizawa, Yagi, as well as his father, had each approached him over the week to reiterate this. No All for One at the sports festival. Not that he would ever use it on his classmates or the UA students. And certainly not on live television. It was bad enough that the League of Villains had seen him use erasure, but they could just take that to mean he has some sort of copying quirk like one of the kids in Class 1B did. Instead, Izuku focused on his other 3 quirks, Pull, Shield, and One for All. There was still no progress on pushing past his 5% limit for One for All. Every time he dared to go any higher, his body would creak and groan like a house about to fall apart. It was frustrating but still manageable. Pull was stronger though, especially when used in conjunction with One for All. He could pull massive objects and even people toward him. If he made it to the finals, he could pull someone right into his fist to punch them that much harder. He'd been working with Shield as well. It took him and his father a few days of calculations before they figured out how much damage it could take before it shattered. It turned out it also got more powerful when he applied One for All on it. However, when those reinforced shields break, the backlash on his body is much worse. He broke his arms twice testing it. Recovery Girl and his father were not pleased. On the day of the festival, Izuku made his way to the room his class was being held in before the start. Ready to go in his gym uniform, he went over everything he had planned in his head. He reached the door and heard some of his classmates inside. It looks like he wasn't the first one there. Problem child, Aizawa called. He was still wrapped in bandages, but he looked much better. Are you ready for today? Remember our last conversation? Izuku smiled. Of course Aizawa-sensei. I've got a handle on everything. Right. Good. Listen, Midoriya, between everything that happened I forgot to tell you something, he said. It's not a big deal. You know how every year the festival kicks off with the student representative giving a speech. He nodded, not liking where this conversation was heading. You got the highest score on the entrance exam, so, when midnight calls you up, have something ready, he said and promptly turned around. Good luck. He was left gawking at the door. A speech? A speech? He hated public speaking with a passion that rivaled his love for heroics. What was he gonna do? He opened the door to the waiting room, hearing but unable to listen as his classmates talked animatedly about the upcoming events. Wordlessly he sat down, staring at his hands in his lap. Deku-kun. Uraraka yelled, poking at the side of his head. You okay? What the fuck am I going to do? He whispered. Hey, she asked, leaning in. I didn't catch that. Izuku looked up at her, panicked. What the fuck am I going to do, Uraraka-san? He asked, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her lightly. I'm afraid of public speaking. I can't give a speech, I'll die. She blinked and grabbed his arms, steadying him. Deku-kun, calm down, she said, before turning to her side. Ida-kun, help, Deku-kun is panicking. Ida slid into the chair next to them. Midoriya-kun, please calm yourself, he said, before gently patting his head. It's going to be all right. It's not okay, he wailed. Nothing is okay right now. I have to give a speech, he cried. Did they not understand how serious this was? He was going to have to talk to millions of people. They'd be looking at him, listening to him. Uraraka offered a kind smile. It's okay, Deku-kun, she said, you can do it. You took on villains, right? You can give a little speech, I know it. Izuku shook his head rapidly. No, I can't. What would I even say? I'll just get up there and stutter and just tell them I'm gonna win and be done with it, Kikin yelled from his seat. It's what I'd say. I'm not going to just say I'm going to win. No, stupid, tell them I'm gonna win. Me? Bakugo Katsuki. You can even call me Kikin when you do it, he grinned wildly. But Kikin, Izuku said, a brief feeling of calm washing over him. He'd never turned down an opportunity to antagonize Kikin. I'm gonna be the winner though. And as expected, he exploded. Fuck off, you shitty nerd. See if I help you again. Deku-kun, I got it. Eureka said. Just pretend you're talking to me and Ida-kun when you give your speech, she told him. You talk to us just fine, so just try and hype us up. You'll do great. Ida nodded. You do have a way with words in day-to-day conversations. Yeah, exactly, she cheered. As long as you do that, anything you say will sound good. Izuku sighed, before planting his head on the table in front of him. I'm just gonna lay here with my thoughts for a bit, he said, though it was muffled through the table. It was cold and gave him a bit of respite from the outside world and his building headache. Eureka sat on the table next to his head. Her fingers began to slide through his hair soothingly. That felt nice, having his hair played with. He felt a flush rise up his cheeks. What was he going to say? He could go for something short and sweet like plus ultra, but that felt a little generic. If he had the time, he'd be writing a speech about 10 minutes long, that rat bastard. Aizawa probably did this on purpose just so Izuku wouldn't have a super long speech. Asshole. Mean teacher. He definitely made the right call in doing this, and Izuku couldn't stay mad, but still. What would his dad say? What would All Might say? Ugh, he wished he had his phone on him. He'd text their family group chat and see if either of them had advice for him. Eureka was doing a great job helping him get rid of some of this awful tension. He could feel the knot between his shoulders loosening. Everyone, we should be set to enter the stadium soon. Ida called, the diligent class president he was. Izuku picked up his head with a groan. Thanks for that, Eureka-san. It helped a lot. She offered a smile. I'm glad. As he was walking out, he was stopped. Midoriya, Izuku glanced back. Todoroki approached him. Before we go out there, I have something I want to say, he said. If you look at us objectively as we stand, I think I'm stronger than you. But you're the one with All Might in his corner. He tilted his head. I also know you think we're friends, but I want you to remember what I said last time we faced each other. Midoriya, I'm going to win today. And if that means I have to take you down, so be it. Kirishima and Kaminari both exchanged a look out of the corner of Izuku's eye. Kikin growled, glaring at both of them. Izuku stood up, the chair making a screech across the floor. He turned to Todoroki and walked to him until their chests were almost pressed together. He had to crane his neck up to meet his intense mismatched gaze. Listen, I agree with you. On paper, your quirk currently outclasses mine. Not only that, but you're a competent fighter and a serious threat. However, he said, holding up his finger to Todoroki's face, everyone is going to be going at this with everything they have. Not just me. Not just this room, I mean everyone. The kids from all of the other departments are going to be coming at us full throttle. Last time we fought, you said you'd win our next fight. So prove it, Todoroki-kun. Just try and beat me. He broke out into a smirk, remembering something from their last fight. Follow the green rabbit. Todoroki glared back, his teeth bared. It was almost unnerving seeing the Ice Prince emote that much. When I crush you today, he leaned down to whisper so that only Izuku could hear his next words. You're going to add that little green bunny tail to your hero costume. His breath ghosted along the shell of Izuku's ear. He shivered. Todoroki pulled back and walked away from Izuku. He left the room first, slamming the door behind him. Izuku felt his entire face heat up, but a grin made its way onto his face. He was going to mop the stadium floor with that pretty face of his. Freshman class of the Heroics Department. 1A. Present Mick's voice boomed through the entire stadium, and Izuku walked toward the front of the pack. He looked around the field. Oh God, it was packed. So many people, he was going to have to talk in front of all of them? Class 1B. Not to mention all of the people in his own grade. Present Mike kept naming off the classes as they made it to the center of the field, near the small stage they prepared. "Hey there kiddos." Midnight waved from the stage, her voice amplified by the microphone. "You're all looking so young and fresh and just hyped up to go. Gets me excited." She smiled at them, though it gave Izuku no feeling of comfort. "I'm going to be your chief referee this year, freshman," she explained. "So let's get this thing started with a speech from your year's representative. Midoriya Izuku." Izuku swallowed hard, his shaking legs barely carrying him up to the stage. Each step up felt like he was inching closer to his doom. Finally, he stood in front of the microphone, his eyes wide as he stared into the massive crowd. He couldn't do this. He wanted to hide, to cry. What would his father do? "Just pretend you're talking to me and Ida when you give your speech. I want you to stride onto the field and tell them with all you might that I am here." Izuku. He could do this. He had to do this. "I, and everyone behind me, have something we want to show today," he said. "Every single one of us has something to prove. I can't say if we'll all be successful in that, but I know for me personally, we're the future of heroics. In just a few years, we'll be hitting the scenes as pro-heroes, taking on the mantle of keeping the peace. Some of us have already had to start shouldering that burden, but it's one we'll take with a smile. The sports festival is about showing the world what's to come. We all have something we want to say today, myself included." He closed his eyes and inhaled. Then, he smiled as brightly as he could manage. "I am here," he said before pointing over his shoulder with his thumb. "Actually, I'd like to amend that. We are here." "Thank you." He gave a short bow, then cheers. Not just from the crowd but his classmates. He turned and walked down the steps, feeling a million times lighter than when he walked up there. Eureka and Ida grabbed him once he was on the ground, both of them congratulating him on his speech. Izuku felt like he might be sick though. "Amazing speech by our representative, and with those glowing words, let's get right to our first event," Midnight yelled, pointing to the large screen in the field. It lit up showing a wheel of various events. It spun round and round before it stopped. "It looks like it's going to be the obstacle race," she cheered. "All 11 classes will partake in a race around the stadium, stretching nearly 4 kilometers. Anything goes so long as you stay on the track that starts," she points to a gate. "There. When the light turns green, you can go." As Izuku lined up in the hallway with everyone else, he could feel his blood pumping, his quirks firing, just begging to be used. He was going to crush this. Red. Yellow. Green. The students ran out of the gate into the hallway. It was cramped, with people squishing together attempting to all push through at once. Todoroki cleared them first, using his ice to hold people in place and slide through them. "Pretty bastard. Oh no you don't, icy hot." Kiken's voice rang out. Izuku wasn't about to let them get ahead. He jumped, full cowl activating. "Sorry," he called as he ran over people, bouncing from their shoulders to the wall over their heads and launching himself forward. He landed right in front of the crowd and broke out into a sprint from behind Kiken, speeding forward ahead of him. Izuku could see his target, Todoroki, a bit ahead of him. He had stopped, and Izuku could see why from here. 0 pointers from the entrance exam. Tons of them. Shit. Izuku barely took one on, and even then he'd sacrificed an entire limb to do so. He didn't have that kind of resources here. Todoroki did, however, so Izuku would have to be fast. He didn't slow down, keeping his pace. Cold air hit his face as Todoroki iced over the robots, stopping them in place. Todoroki ran under it. He made a path, someone yelled. "That sweet summer child." Todoroki didn't make a path, he just changed the obstacle. "Careful now," Todoroki yelled back, "they might not be that sturdy." Izuku jumped, his legs quivering from the backlash. Had he lost control of that jump? Whatever. It didn't matter, he didn't think he broke anything. He kicked off from the 0-pointer, jumping again toward the ground. Before he hit the track though, he laid out his hands, shield forming from them. Shield took the impact, allowing Izuku to roll and keep moving. Not getting rid of him that easily. Todoroki. He was still a few yards off from him, but Izuku was gaining, and fast. He could hear people pushing through behind them. Kiken's blasts, and Zero's tape, what he could have sworn was Kirishima pushing through the metal of the 0-pointer. He had to keep moving or people were going to catch up to him. The next obstacle was tightropes. Todoroki easily made himself an ice bridge, making it melt behind him as he went. Izuku cursed under his breath. Should he take it slow? No time. No time to take anything slow. Full cowling made him fast, and if he kept his footing true he'd make it. It was difficult. He had to force his brain to not overthink every step he took. To not feel how the wires shuddered under every step and jump. Eventually, he was the second person to make it across, but the gaps between him and the people behind him were getting smaller. He wasted too much time there. Not good. He took off, attempting to make up for lost time between obstacles. He was going to do this. He could win the first event. Todoroki had slowed to a stop. Izuku skidded to a halt not far behind, and like with the 0 pointers, immediately understood why. The third obstacle was a minefield. He watched as Todoroki carefully made his way through. He weighed his options. Izuku could do as Todoroki did, and begin to walk and watch his step, but that would take precious time. He could also try and brute force it. His shield could take any hit these mines would throw at him. He also had pull. Oh, now there was an idea. Izuku hopped between the mines, his eyes carefully scanning the ground for mines before he landed. He was catching up to Todoroki. He could do this. He could overtake him. These fucking mines don't mean jack shit to me. Kaken screamed from behind him, using his explosions to propel himself past Izuku right to where Todoroki was. Half and half. You gave your declaration to the wrong fucking rival. I'm the one you're gonna wanna beat, not fucking Deku. Never change Katsuki. The two of them were neck and neck. Kaken took a swipe at Todoroki, trying to pull him back. Now was his only chance. They were nearing the end of the minefield. Izuku jumped, and right before he was going to land, he called out pull, his hands outstretched. He pulled Kaken and Todoroki back by their heads, arresting their movement and shooting Izuku forward towards them. Thanks for the boost, he yelled, jumping onto their shoulders. And here's a goodbye present from yours truly. He let go of their heads, aiming both his hands down and slightly behind himself, and flicked his fingers. The mines under them exploded. Izuku jumped from their shoulders, using that and the explosion to propel himself into first place. He hit the ground just beyond the minefield and he ran. Get back here, Deku. I'm going to skin that rabbit. Izuku grinned. Full cowling burned on his skin, but he kept running, and he didn't stop. The cheers of the crowd met his ears. He passed through the gates. Izuku was first. He was here. In the box, sitting next to Toshinori, Hisashi was screaming. He'd stood out of his chair, cheering so loudly his voice started to sound hoarse. That's my son. He turned to Toshinori, grabbing his hands tightly. That's our boy. He did great. I was worried over nothing, Toshinori laughed. He's really doing this. That's my boy Izu. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves, he said, pulling Hisashi back down. Izuku's not out of the woods yet, Hisashi. Human cavalry battle. 10 million points. You have 15 minutes to start your negotiations, Midnight said, starting now. Think Izuku, use your big boy brain. He's worth 10 million points. That just means he has to play defensively, and he does in fact, have a shield quirk. He could do this. He's highly mobile. That'll be the way, to find other highly mobile people. He could do this. Uraraka-san, he called, going to find his friend. Uraraka-san, I have an idea. She appeared at his side, beaming. Ooh. Evil genius Deku-kun, she smiled, hit me with your brilliant plan. How long can you make yourself weightless, he asked her. Well. Not super long. 5 minutes at a time at max, but even then I feel sick. It's easier to make other people weightless, Uraraka explained. Izuku nods. Then they'd need a third. Preferably someone with that's a great idea. Where's Ida-kun? I have an idea, he said and grabbed her hand before marching off to find the third member of their trio. He drags her through the crowd before he spots the tall handsome cut of their friend's back. Ida. Team up with us. Ida turns to face them, though he doesn't smile. Listen, Midoriya-kun, he starts, I'd love to but, I can't keep relying on you. He placed a warm hand on Izuku's shoulder. You're a good friend, but Todoroki-kun isn't the only one who wants to defeat you. So I'll have to refuse. But I do hope we both make it to the next stage. I get it, Izuku said, placing his hand on top of Ida's. Thank you for being honest, Ida, he smiled softly. We'll see you in the final round. I look forward to it. And with that, Ida left. Izuku turned to Eureka. We need to find someone who's fast, or he was cut off by his arm being grabbed tightly, almost knocking him over. Hey 10 million. A girl who Izuku had never seen before appeared, squeezing his arm tightly in her own and pulling it to her chest like a hug. Let's team up. Everyone is going to be watching you, so you'll be the perfect person to use my babies. She was pretty, with a head of pink dreads and interesting eyes. Izuku looked to Eureka for help, though she looked murderous. Scary. He started. I'm sorry, but who are you? He asked the girl. She grinned. I'm Haste-May, support course student. Oh right, the support kids. They were allowed to bring in support items so long as they made them themselves. So what's our strategy? She asked. Do you have anything that can make you float? He asked her. Sure do. She pointed down at her boots, then turned to showcase her jetpack. My babies can fly and boost you through the air. Perfect. Do you have any cable or rope? Something you can use to tie yourself to me? Yep. You're in, he said. Give the boots and jetpack to Eureka-san, he ordered. Eureka-san, please make me and Haste-san weightless. We're doing a 3-man horse. I'll be the front, you be the rear. We'll both hold up Haste-san and give her all of our headbands. I'll drive, you boost. And I'll have my hands free for using pull and shield. Eureka listened and nodded along. Oh Deku-kun, that's brilliant. We'll be so mobile. And your quirk was practically made for this, she said. He grinned, showing nothing but teeth. It'll be difficult, but with the 3 of us we're gonna win. When it was almost time, they got into position. As planned, Izuku was in front, with Haste-him on his back, piggyback style, with all 3 bands fastened to her forehead. She tied herself to him, then Eureka to herself, before eagerly throwing her arms around his neck, and wrapping her legs around his chest. He blushed, but at least she was secure. Eureka was in the back, jetpack and boots on and ready to go. She made Izuku and Haste-him weightless, but Izuku kept his feet firmly on the ground until it was time for liftoff. We'll jump as soon as she says go, he said, crouching into position. He took this time to make note of the other teams. The 2 biggest red flags were Kiken, who'd taken Shiro, Ashido, and Kirishima. That would be a dangerous one. The second, possibly larger red flag was Todoroki with Yaoyorozu, Kaminei, and Ida. That was a dangerous combination. He didn't really have an answer for Kaminari beyond a hunch, but he'd have to see it in practice. But Kaminari did have some friendly fire issues. Start. Midnight called. I'm coming for you, Midoriya. Get that 10 million. That is our cue, ladies, Izuku said, getting ready to kick off the ground, only to find it was melting under his shoes. The Class 1B team was closing in. Oh crap. This must be one of their quirks. What a great quirk. He'd definitely have to talk to whoever this belonged to later, because damn it if that wasn't dead useful. Eureka-san now. She hit the button, the gear she had roaring to life and pulling them from the soft ground. It wasn't enough though. Izuku summoned One for All, and flicked at the ground, giving them just enough pushback to shoot into the air. Jiro's ears were coming towards them. Izuku put his hands out, summoning his shield and blocking their path with ease. Eureka pushed them forward through the air, away from their pursuers. So we just hang out up here? She asked from behind. Not quite, Izuku replied. Just until they realize we're not worth being their only targets. Once the fighting begins, we can swoop down and start taking headbands. Haste-him asked, smiling wide, you want to steal headbands? We're in the first place. Izuku grinned. I don't just want to win by being defensive. I want to have a total victory. Plus, just in case someone manages to snag our 10 million, it'll be a failsafe, he said. They floated in the air for a while, watching as the other teams decided it was better to take on smaller targets. Let's land, it's time to goad some stupid boys into some fights. His eyes were on Todoroki. Todoroki stared right back. Alright you green rabbit, he called, it's time for me to take what's mine. Izuku landed softly, still weightless. Is this really the fight you want, Todoroki-kun? he asked innocently. Let's dance. Green electricity sparked around his body as he simply raised his hand. I'm not really one you want to mess with here. To punctuate his point, he used pull, tugging Todoroki's headband right off his head. It flew to his palm with ease. I'm built for this. He handed it to Hatsum, who just laughed maniacally and placed it with the others on her neck. Todoroki, for his part, looked like Izuku had just spat in his face. Ida, he commanded, let's go. Ida's engines roared to life, and they charged forward. Izuku pulled out his shield, blocking the hit from their attacks. Ice, Ida's shoe, a metal pole Yaoyorozu made, and perfect. His shield was protecting him from the electricity as well. He held his arms out, tanking all of their blows. We need to get them off our backs, he said. Got anything in that bag of tricks, Hatsum? He asked. My shield won't last forever. She grinned. Why, I thought you'd never ask. From her belt, she pulled out a small gun. One shot, 10 million. When I say, lower your shield. Izuku nodded, activating full cowling with his shield. He needed it to last another barrage of Todoroki's team's attacks. They came back. More ice, more jet-fueled kicks, and more electricity. Now. Izuku dropped shield, and Hatsum fired her gun. Instead of a bullet, a mid-sized metal net flew out of it, covering the other team. Oh, that's brilliant. Kaminari's shocks electrocuted them, stunning the entire team. He watched for a moment as his classmates hissed in pain. This was their chance to get away. Izuku and Uraraka turned tail, the jetpack, and Izuku's super jump pushing them back into the air. That was a close call. Uraraka said. Yeah, though we only made ourselves bigger targets to Todoroki. I took his headband, which was their highest point value, he said, watching the ground. Todoroki was clearly still watching them from the corner of his eye, but for the time being, his team had decided to move on. They'll need to target us or another large point group in order to keep in the game. And they're running out of time already. Hey Hatsum-san, how much fuel does this jetpack have? Uraraka asked. It sounds like it might give out. Hatsum only laughed. Not enough. But I haven't been able to figure out how to make it last longer, so it will probably run out any minute now. Izuku cursed under his breath. We should land. We'll need that fuel if we need another quick escape, he said, aiming for a more clear spot of the field. There's not much time left, and so far we've been able to keep everyone at bay, so hopefully, people have decided we're not worth it. Once his feet touched the ground, pain stabbed him in the side of the head. Just like at the USJ. A deep, velvety voice spoke. I'll be taking that headband now, rabbit. Ice suddenly encapsulated his feet. They were stuck to the ground. Todoroki's team was hot on their trail, Ida leading the charge. The murderous gleam in Todoroki's eyes was honestly a bit sexy. Izuku had no time to think and threw up his shield to tank the hit. A huge crack ran down his shield. One more good hit and it'd shatter, taking his arms with it. Then they'd be doomed. He'd have to stun them. Kaminari wasn't using his electricity, too scared for another metal net. Not that Hatsum had another shot. He'd have to go for a punch. Izuku upped one for all to 8%. His body groaned in pain, but it was enough to break his feet from the ice. He jumped, dropping shield. He delivered a swift kick to Ida's stomach. Sorry Ida-kun, he cried, watching Ida double over in pain. With Ida going down to his knees, it brought Todoroki down as well. Izuku used pull, bringing Todoroki's face into his fist as he punched, smacking him right upside the jaw. Todoroki hissed in pain. Fire sprang from his left shoulder as he went to take a swipe at Izuku. But he stopped, his mismatched eyes wide. The flames went out at once. Izuku took the opportunity to punch him again. Yaoyorozu jumped. A hand moving past Izuku to Hatsum. She defended, but Yaoyorozu snagged a headband. Withdraw, she yelled, and she and Kaminari pulled Todoroki back. Ida had finally managed to stand, and they fled the scene. Oh god, what headband did they take? He turned his head to Hatsum, who was somehow still smiling. Time. Midnight called. Did they get it? Izuku asked Hatsum. Nope. They just got their original headband back, she grinned, holding up the same 3 headbands they'd started with. The 10 million one is right in her hand. The 3 of us are going on to the next round, she said with a small cheer. Their team was going to the finals. Izuku smiled brightly, the three of them cheering as they untangled themselves from each other and the wire they'd used to bind themselves together. As the girls cheered, now complimenting each other for their hard work in the cavalry battle, Izuku's eyes found Todoroki, who was away from his group. They'd gotten third place and would be moving on to the finals, but Todoroki looked miserable, staring at his left hand. His eyes met Izuku's. Todoroki gave a slight jerk of his head, a silent, "Follow me." Well, they did have an hour before the finals. Without another word, Izuku slipped away from the girls, following Todoroki into the unknown. Chapter 13, That's All. Chapter by Roxi2Star. Shoto walked quickly, only glancing behind him to make sure Midoriya was still following. He was. Good. Shoto found an empty hall on the ground floor of the stadium, far enough away from all the commotion so they wouldn't be interrupted. He leaned on the wall across from Midoriya, staring at him. Midoriya looked pensive, leaning against the wall as well. He was chewing on his bottom lip, hands pulling at the edge of his gym shirt. Shoto was almost inclined to call the behavior cute. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Midoriya asked, cocking his head. The tilt made some of the mess of hair on top frame his face in a way that made Shoto's heart stutter. "You took me by surprise. So much so that I broke my promise to myself," Shoto said, lifting his own left hand up. He hated this side of himself. He hated everything about it. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" he asked. "You can talk to me, we're friends." "Midoriya, are you All Might's secret love child?" He started before he laughed. He laughed hard, holding his stomach. Todoroki-kun, he managed to squeak out. Even Midoriya's laugh was cute. "You've met my dad," he said. "So? You don't look that much like him. There's a chance All Might is your father and your father is pretending to be your dad as a cover," Shoto reasoned. He'd thought about this, and that was the best argument he could come up with. "There's no way a fire-breathing quirk and a telekinetic quirk came together to make give and take," he said. Midoriya stopped laughing. "Oh, you're serious," he said. "No, Todoroki-kun, All Might isn't my biological father. I know that for sure." "That's not it at all." There was something about that phrasing. That meant there was something. What had Midoriya called it? Deductive reasoning. "At the very least you have a connection to him outside of UA. I won't pry any more regarding it, but I noticed that at the USJ, he called you by your given name," Shoto continued. "I'm sure you're aware of who my father is. That he's the number 2 hero. You have a deep connection with the number 1 hero. That means I have to defeat you." The other boy nodded along, adjusting to a more comfortable position to listen to Shoto talk more. "Okay? So, this is about your dad?" he asked. His large eyes were boring into Shoto, making his insides squirm. He hated it. "Yes," Shoto said, "he's a devious man. He's been after the number 1 spot for years. I think he realized years ago that he'd never get there on his own. So he made a plan." "Midoriya, do you know what a quirk marriage is?" He watched his reaction. Midoriya's eyes widened. "I do." "Oh, Todoroki, He didn't want pity. Shoto put a hand up, stopping Midoriya in his tracks. "He's a bastard of the worst kind. He picked my mother out of her happy life and forced her to marry him. 4 times he made her have a child, until he made me. Half hot, half cold," he said. Talking about this was tearing him apart down the line that separated him into 2. "Then he trained me my entire life, and forged me into his tools so that I'd be the next number 1 hero and usurp that title from All Might," he growled out. "In my memories, my mom is always crying." He brought his hand up to the scar on his face. "She said my left side was ugly, and then she poured boiling water over it." Midoriya was quiet. He didn't move. His wide green eyes stayed glued to Shoto's face. He watched as they grew damp. "Todoroki, that's awful," he said. "We can tell my dad or All Might. We can get you out of the house and away from." "Shut up!" Shoto yelled. "He's the number 2 hero, nothing you do or say will make this better, so just shut up and listen." He panted slightly. Why was he tired? "I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the greatest hero anyone has ever seen, and no child will ever suffer the way I did," he snarled. "But I'm going to do it without using my left side." His side. "So, Midoriya, if you want to help me so badly, I have a favor." "Anything," he said without missing a beat. Shoto paused. That was kind of him. Zero hesitation. Shoto closed the gap, now crowding in Midoriya's space. He ignored the racing of his heart. Use your quirk on me, and take the fire that belongs to my father, he said. You can have it, or give it away. I don't care, but please just take it. Midoriya's mouth turned into a small O shape. He looked away, his eyes downcast. Todoroki-kun, I don't think that will work, he said. Why not? I have 2 quirks, right? So just take the fire quirk and... That's not how that works. People don't just have multiple quirks. Your quirk is half hot and half cold. It's all one big package. I wouldn't be able to just take your fire, I'd take your ice too. You'd be quirkless. Besides, I promised my dad and Aizawa I wouldn't use it, he explained. He grabbed Midoriya's wrist and brought his hand up to his face. Shoto's voice broke as he spoke. Please try, he begged. Okay. 5 warm fingers pressed into his face. There was a swell of darkness in his mind. Shoto swallowed the fear and closed his eyes. He could handle darkness. He'd seen more than his fair share. He allowed the sensation of the void to take him, chew him up, and spit him back out. Midoriya pulled his hand away, and Shoto felt empty. He whimpered softly at the loss. His body felt different. The cool spring air made the skin on his arm tighten into goosebumps. I'm sorry, Midoriya said softly. He held out his hands in front of Shoto. In his left he summoned fire, but in his right, ice collected on his fingers. It's what I thought. It's just 1 quirk, he said and dismissed the fire and ice. Here, let me give this back. His voice was soft as that same warm hand found Shoto's face again. This time, the void was welcome. Shoto could feel his body temperature return to normal. When the hand pulled away, it took everything in him not to chase its warmth. Thank you for trying. He nodded. Are you sure there isn't anything else we can do? There's nothing that would stop him. Even if you tried he'd just... Shoto trailed off. Agitating his father only made it worse. Asking for help made everything so much worse. Even if Shoto could get away. My mother is in a mental hospital, he explained. She's there on his dime. He controls what happens to her. He could see the light of understanding take place in Midoriya's eyes. He still looked near tears' eye. Listen, you're going to be a great hero. I know that no matter what happens after today, you're going to save a lot of people, Todoroki-kun. I get your reasons for wanting to win without your fire side. But I'll be honest with you, he paused contemplating, I think you're just handicapping yourself. I get why you want to reject your fire, but what if there's an emergency that your fire could fix? Would you simply ignore it out of pride? 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 It's not about pride. But it kind of is though, Midoriya said, shaking his head. Listen, I get where you're coming from. Believe me, way more than you understand. But you were born with that quirk. You've decided to be a hero. You owe it to not just yourself, but to every person who you'll take a vow to protect, to use every ounce of yourself to keep them safe. You think I like using my quirk? He asked with a dark look covering his face. I don't. I hate my quirk. I wish I didn't have it, but I'm still going to use it. If you hate it, don't use it. Do you know what would have happened if I didn't use my quirk at the USJ? First, I would have been burned to death by a 2-bit villain with a pyrokinesis quirk. Then, All Might would have died. Then every single one of our classmates would have died. The villains would have won, and we'd all be dead. That's what would have happened, Midoriya said firmly. But I did use it. Even though it made me uncomfortable. I did it to help people. It's the same reason I just used it on you. I hated doing that to you, but I did it to try and help. Shoto growled. Why won't he understand? It's not the same. Your quirk is so powerful and useful and... It is the same, he yelled. I'm sorry your dad is a piece of shit, and I'm sorry that happened to your mom. But just because your fire came from him doesn't mean it's evil. It's part of you and you're going to have to learn to live with it. He broke from the wall and went to walk away. He turned to Todoroki. If you and I meet on the field today, actually, when you and I meet on the field today, I'm going to come at you with everything I have short of give and take, because Aizawa would expel me on the spot everything else I have in my kit and I'm going to kick your ass. If you want even a chance at taking me down you'll have to use every part of yourself too. I will not. Quirks don't make heroes, Todoroki-kun. Hearts do. Shoto watched as Midoriya walked away. He'd show him. He'd take him down without his father's power. He'd do it, even if it tore him apart or ruined that pretty face Midoriya had. He was going to win. Izuku was so angry. He was so angry with Endeavor. He had half a mind to sneak up on that flame-faced asshole and steal his fire so he'd never be able to hurt Todoroki ever again. He was angry with himself for thinking that. He was angry with himself because there was nothing he could do to help. If only he were stronger, better. He needed to be able to do something. Izu, there you are. Izuku stopped on his path to the mess hall. His father turned the corner behind him, smiling brightly. Here, I got you lunch already, Izu, what's wrong? As soon as he saw his father, he began to cry. He ran down the empty hall, throwing his arms around his father's middle, and buried his face into his chest. Izuku sobbed and sobbed, pulling his father in tightly. Dad, he mumbled into his suit jacket. I just learned something awful. They found a quiet hall to eat. His father handed him a bowl of katsudon from the mess hall. They sat on the floor, pressed together. Dad combed his fingers through Izuku's curls as he ate, listening to the tale of Todoroki Shoto. He didn't say a word, simply letting Izuku get the story out of him. Once he finished, his father finally spoke. That poor kid, he said. Don't worry, Izu, I'm going to help your friend. And his mother, Dad smiled softly. I don't know how yet, but I promise you I will figure something out. Todoroki won't have to suffer for long, okay? Izuku nodded, chopsticks in his mouth. Not even the flavor of katsudon was cheering him up. All I can think to do for him now is help him use his fire. Just to give him something of himself back, you know. He put the chopsticks down. I wish I could just tell him about All for One. I know I can't, and I know it's for a very good reason, but maybe he wouldn't feel so alone, you know. Dad slung a warm arm around him, pulling him in close. I know, Izu, he said softly. Izuku could smell the faint scent of fire wafting around him. It was comforting. You'll just have to find another way to help him. He stopped and checked his watch. They should be announcing the bracket for the tournament soon. Oh, Izu, I forgot to tell you. He looked up, blinking. What's up, Dad? Great job. I'm so proud of you. If he won his first battle against Shinsu, he'd be going against Todoroki. That was, of course, if Zero didn't beat Todoroki first. Who was he kidding? Poor Zero didn't stand a chance against Todoroki. His ice was an impressive force all on its own, and unless Zero was very fast, he'd be going down. Izuku was also fairly certain he'd win his matchup. Ojiro had told Izuku exactly how to defeat Shinsu. He'd simply have to not talk, and he could just toss him out of the ring and move on. He felt almost bad for Shinsu. He'd been fighting tooth and nail to make it to the hero class, and here Izuku was, completely ignoring him for someone else. He could still make it, just by making it to the final event. Shinsu had been the only person from the entire general studies to do so. In fact, the only other person outside of the hero classes to make it had been Hatsum, and she'd teamed up with Izuku. He left the room Ojiro had pulled him into to talk in. His match was coming up fast. He turned to head down to the field only to run headfirst into Yagi-san. Hey, glad I caught you, Yagi said with a smile. Got a second? Izuku smiled. Always, he let Yagi put an arm around him as they walked together. Great job so far, he said, you're really making a splash. If you win the tournament, I think that will be the first time a student has come in first place in all 3 events since, well, me. You really think I can do it? He asked. Yagi grinned. If anyone can, it's you, kiddo, he ruffled his hair. You're the next symbol of peace, so I know you've got it in you. You cleaned a whole beach of junk at age 11. You fought the League of Villains, going toe-to-toe with the boss, and saved my life. Izuku, you've got this. He gave Izuku a soft smile, full of pride. He felt like he could take on the world. Honestly though, you've done so much. Even if you don't go all the way to the finish, I want you to know how proud of you I am. Great, he'd just finished crying and here Yagi was trying to make him tear up again. Thank you. Aw man, we gotta start working on your crying, Yagi teased. Now go get them, kiddo. Remember why you're here. I remember, Izuku smiled. I am here, he yelled into the hall. Yes you are. Izuku walked up the steps into the ring. The crowd was roaring. Shinsuke took his place across from him. This should be simple. Just don't talk. Easy, right? Just don't talk. Start. You know your classmate is fucking stupid, Shinsuke said, placing his hands in his pockets. The one with the ugly tail. Pride stupid. He had a chance to be here and he threw it away. Izuku started walking. But hey, he'll get a chance to show off next year. All the hero kids get so many chances. He kept walking. All of you and your great flashy quirks. I mean, look at you. Born with the perfect quirk. Not like me. Don't engage. He was getting closer now. I was born with a villain quirk, you know? That's what everyone said. They never used to let me be alone with the girls in my class because they thought I'd, you know. Not that you'd understand, since your quirk is so perfect. He stopped. Wouldn't understand? I win, Shinsuke said with a grin. Walk out of the ring. Izuku's body turned on its own, like a puppet on a string, forcing him to the edge of the ring. But Izuku couldn't see that. Instead, he was staring down a long hallway where 8 people seemed to be standing. He couldn't see any of their features. They were whispering. But their voices felt so close. Comforting. He could feel the phantom breath on his neck. He talked, that's a shame. He's strong. I don't like him. That bastard's child. He's using my quirk. He knew them. Izuku wasn't sure how, but he knew who these people were. Their names were on the tip of his tongue. We should help. That one was a woman's voice. It was soft. He liked it. It was the next voice, however, that would stick with him for the rest of his life. Soft, and deep. Almost like his father's. Here you go, nephew. One for all gathered in his fingers of his hand. He flexed them, wind pressure exploding around him. His fingers throbbed in pain, but the trance was broken. He gripped his wrist, stopping where he stood, right on the edge of the arena. He'd snapped out of it just in time. What the hell had that been? Who were those people? You snapped out of it? Shinsuke asked. Oh, come the fuck on. Are you kidding me? You do this shit too? This is all I have. Right. Shinsuke first, whatever the hell that had been later. Izuku turned, his expression stony as he ran across the field. Sorry, Shinsuke. He stopped listening to the words Shinsuke was saying. He didn't need a repeat. He used one for all to snatch Shinsuke up and hoist him over his shoulder. Do I even weigh anything to you? Shinsuke yelled as he thrashed in his arms. With one for all, he couldn't do much more than squirm. Izuku brought him to the edge of the ring and tossed him out. Shinsuke is out of bounds. Midoriya wins. Not really, Izuku answered and crouched down to talk to him as Shinsuke lay on the ground. Like a handful of grapes, he offered him a hand. Good fight. I hope it's enough to get you in the hero class with us. I really do want to be your friend, Shinsuke-kun, he said. Shinsuke frowned but took the hand offered to him. We'll see. Once he was on his feet, he looked down at Izuku. You really are just made of sunshine and rainbows, aren't you? Is that a bad thing? Izuku's mind went blank, falling under the control of Shinsuke's quirk for a moment again. He was quickly released. And very trusting, Shinsuke smirked and gave his hair a ruffle. Recovery Girl's office was starting to feel like a second home. With his pointer and middle finger bandaged up tightly, she stood in front of him, wagging her own finger in his face. I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. If you keep injuring your hands, they're going to become unusable, she yelled. This right hand especially, she said. One more big break and it'll at the very least end up looking mangled. It could even be unusable. And you too. She rounded on Yagi and Dad, who'd met him in her office. Control your son. I keep telling him to be careful. Dad argued. I was talking to both of you, she said, then turned back to Izuku. I can't use my quirk to heal it until after the festival. You'll be too tired if I do it now, so just bear with the pain until it's over, okay? And no more breaking your bones. Recovery Girl huffed and stomped off to help other patients from the 2nd and 3rd year festivals. So, Izuku said softly, something crazy happened while I was under Shinsuke's control, he said. I was hoping you could shed some light on it, Yagi-san. Yagi blinked. Sure kid, what happened? When I was in the trance. I saw 8 people. Kind of. Like, distant and hazy shadow people. They talked to me. Or at least about me. He fumbled for his words, but Dad and Yagi both looked shocked. I think they mentioned all for one. I heard one of them call me that bastard's kid. One of them said he's using my quirk, whatever that means, and then, well, he looked at his father. One of them called me nephew. Both of them were quiet. Dad just looked down at his lap, his jaw slack. Yagi, however, looked pensive. That sounds like the vestiges, he said, something Nana mentioned a long time ago. I never really had much interaction with them, but Nana said they appeared to her in dreams sometimes. Wait. Back up. Vestiges? Izuku asked. Well, they're the previous users of One for All, he said. Both Izuku and his father gaped at him. Or at least an echo of them. Nana said that it's like a copy of them right before they died. A ghost of the person they used to be, living on inside One for All. I'm probably in there too. Dad grabbed Yagi's leg. You're saying there's a ghost of my younger brother inside Izuku's quirk? Yagi nodded. It would seem that way. Unfortunately, I don't know much. Nana never really got the chance to tell me about it, and I never experienced it beyond an odd dream or two right when I first got One for All. So, we just have to wait and see if they show up again. Izuku looked down at his hands. The previous users of One for All? If there was a ghost of his uncle, he hoped he'd come back soon. Izuku didn't have much family. He had his dad, and his mom was dead. Mom didn't have any family either, they all died before Izuku was born. Yagi was family, and he supposed Kiken and his parents were like family too. But to have a real uncle. I wouldn't dwell on it too much, Yagi said, pulling Izuku out of his thoughts. At least not today. Just keep your eyes on your goal, okay? Right. Izuku said and stood. Thanks. I'm gonna go back to my class. Dad nodded, though he still looked dazed. Have fun, kiddo. Good luck. He waved to them both and went off to find his seat. The next match was going to be Todoroki vs Zero and he didn't want to miss it. Shoto was livid. Today was just getting worse and worse and worse. First his failure in the race, then his crushing defeat in the cavalry battle, that awful embarrassing trauma dump on Midoriya, and now a word from the talking on fire trashcan that was his sperm donor. It wasn't anything he hadn't heard before, having his promise to himself being called a tantrum, the various degradations of his person, and being referred to as a masterpiece, like he was just some unfeeling gallery piece on a wall. Not a living, breathing person. He'd been through this dance with Endeavor before and he knew he'd have to endure it again. But he'd show that bastard. He stomped up to the ring as Zero went to stand on the other end. This was going to be a shame. He rather tolerated Zero. He was kind, and not as loud as the people he hung out with. Perhaps if Shoto had time for friends he'd be one of Zero's. But that wasn't a life for him. Shoto wouldn't ever have friends or boyfriends or anything of the sort. Not until he'd reached his goal at least. Start? Midnight called. Zero was faster than Shoto gave him credit for. Tape had wrapped itself around his arms, and he was being dragged to the edge. He was still pissed, however, and the anger that was bubbling deep inside him finally exploded. Shoto stomped his right foot and ice and frost burst out of him. Ice more than he'd ever produced in his life shot out of him. His body temperature dropped drastically, and he almost felt the urge to use his left to keep him from freezing. Almost. He blinked the snow that had formed on his lashes away. Oh God. The massive tower of ice he'd created, it was taller than the stadium. Zero frozen in it completely. His face being the only part Shoto could see. How on earth had he made this much ice? That. It was huge. He was so cold. Zero, can you move? Midnight asked, though she sounded concerned. No, Zero mumbled, through his frozen jaw. Let me help, Shoto said and moved across the field. Todoroki is the winner, she yelled. Shoto got to work thawing Zero out. He heated his left up slowly, though fire was jumping from his arm. It was almost trying to spill out of him. What was happening? He normally had great control, even on his fire side. He could at least keep it low and warm, but this was nuts. Shoto had to take several long meditative breaths before he could control the heat. He melted Zero from his icy prison. Sorry, he mumbled, don't know what happened there. Zero for his part only smiled through chattering teeth. "And no WW worries are Roki," he said before shuffling past him to go see Recovery Girl. Roki? Was that a nickname? He'd never had one of those before. He thought about the way Midoriya called Bakugo Kikin as he helped the teachers melt his own ice. Kikin. What a stupid nickname. Childish. But at the same time, it must be nice. Roki was nice. It was dumb, but it felt nice for someone to call him something so familiar. Without his permission, his mind supplied a thought of Midoriya on his knees, sitting on top of his bedroom's futon completely naked, with bunny ears and a bunny tail, calling him Shao-chan. Fire nearly burst from his left side again. The first rounds were over. Izuku was moving on to the next round. So was Todoroki. Izuku had to admit he was scared of the power Todoroki had displayed. He had no idea his quirk was that strong. If he didn't have a plan, he was going to get decimated in one hit like Zero did. He needed to be smart like Eureka. Even though her plan didn't work, she still did great against Kikin. But Kikin was Kikin. Winning a fight against him was no easy feat, Izuku knew firsthand. He'd felt bad for her, and he knew she cried the moment he left the room after checking on her. His and Todoroki's fight was going to be the first of the second round. Izuku had to get his game face on. He'd have to break Todoroki's ice, get in close and knock him out. Maybe get a few good hits in, make him show him that fire he knew was there. The fire that Todoroki deserved to be able to use for himself. Speaking of fire, something smelled like it was burning. Izuku turned the corner and squeaked. Endeavor was in the hallway. He was massive, broad, and was literally on fire. He stopped, looking down at Izuku. He felt small. His cold blue eyes, man, how did Todoroki manage to make that color blue look so pretty when this asshole made it look scary as hell? His eyes scanned him. "You're strong," he said simply. "The wind pressure from just a flick of your fingers was incredible." He wasn't smiling. "A truly marvelous quirk. Not to mention the shield and your mobility, and of course, that mind of yours. You're always thinking, I can tell," he said. "You could rival All Might someday." "Thank you?" Izuku asked. The words themselves were technically compliments, but something about his tone made him feel like they were anything but. My Shouto. Izuku did not like the way he said that. Talking about Todoroki as if he were an object. "Has a duty to surpass All Might. And you will be a wonderful first test," he smirked, "put up a good fight, and try not to disgrace him like the last kid did." He turned to walk away. "That's all." Words came out of his mouth before he could stop them. "You know I'm not All Might, right?" he asked. "Obviously," Endeavor said, glancing over his shoulder. His eyes widened slightly. Perhaps from the intense look on Izuku's face. "And Todoroki-kun isn't you," he said, "so, even if he kicks my ass today, and in a few years he climbs the ranks and becomes the #1 hero, which he's got a real shot at, by the way. He's so strong. And he's got a good heart, Todoroki is going to be a great hero. Point is, even if he surpasses All Might, you still will never have. You'll always be second-rate." Izuku put his hands in his pockets and turned his back on Endeavor. As he turned the corner, Izuku looked over his shoulder. Endeavor hadn't moved, stuck to the spot he stood as if frozen in shock. Izuku called back to him, "That's all." "All right, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below, and check out the video or playlist on the screen for more content from me. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.